Welcome, everybody, to the Valentine's Day meeting of the Metropolitan Washington Old Time Radio Club. We're delighted to have you here tonight. I guess we're all sweethearts here. So that's very exciting. And I am not going to spend any more time. Do the visitors want to sort of wave frantically at the screen, or are you all good? All right, I'm not seeing any waving, so we will go on to our first 15. Do we have Karl Schadow here?
We do.
All right.
We do, with a nice cold. Yep.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Karl. That is miserable.
Yeah. It is. It's been a rough week down here.
Yeah. It's been pretty. So you're the 804 phone number, right? Or no?
That is correct.
All right.
Yes.
Well, I will rename
I'm 804. That'd be fine.
So great stuff. And then I will give our own Frank hosting privileges so he can, do his thing. And is there, and he's running a deck for you, isn't he, Karl?
Yes, he's running the slides. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
excellent. Yep.
Yeah, I'm just looking for Frank. Here we are, Frank. Make co-host. Yes. All right. So I will turn this over now for the first 15 to our own VP, Frank Morgan.
Okay, everybody. Karl Schadow will be presenting tonight. Stand by for adventure. So let me share the screen, get the slide presentation up, and get the show on the road.
Yeah, just let me know when it's up, Frank.
I will.
Okay.
All right, that's it. All right. And now I want to find the share audio and we'll be ready to go. Okay, are we up?
The screen is displaying.
Okay.
So that's great. And I ask everyone to mute yourself during the presentation.
All right, Karl, we're ready to go.
Thank you, Frank and Wendy. Great. Okay. Well, as I mentioned when I called in, I was this terrible cold, so hopefully this is going to be a quicker 15 than I usually have. So I apologize up front for that. It's certainly going to be an adventure, and I'm not standing by. I'm actually sitting, so we're good on that. I picked this show as a 15-minute, again, as an obscure drama. Many of the slides you'll see, the artwork was taken appropriately from an NBC brochure, which I'll talk about as we go through. So stand by for adventure if you want to look for it. Where the stations wanted to pick up this show? Well, where do you go into the next slide? You have the grocery store. Yes, NBC radio recording. The publicity people were very creative. It looks like this is a grocery store here. NBC radio recordings, that was the recordings division of the NBC network. It was originally created in 1934 as the electrical transcription department. The NBC and CBS were very adamant that network programs were live, but they also had these very interesting financial arms of their respective networks for recordings that they could send out to various stations and sponsors. So they made money on the side doing that. And the shows, and the third slide, as you walk into the grocery store, and yes, they're just putting up the list there for us.
It's up.
In 1944, It's up? Okay, great. 1944 list there with the gentleman just posting it in the store. There's several shows from soap operas, Betty and Bob, to fantasy horror program, The Word Circle, to Standby Adventure, which we're going to talk about today, sporting show, and they've got some others there too as well. And with the various stations, the number of stations that were currently contracted with NBC to produce these locally with local sponsors. So let's go to we'll go right into the audio on the next slide. So cue up the audio, Frank.
Ready to go.
Under these footsteps. You've just heard a man disappear. A man who walked into a house, took off his shoes, and vanished. Like magic. But that's not possible, you say. People don't just disappear. Well then, listen to Stand By for Adventure. In the living room of our host, the celebrated scientist, Dr. Juan Avillo, the firelight flickers over the faces of his guests. Richard Moore, correspondent, adventurer, Captain Quigley, retired merchant seaman, and Major Gordon, former Army officer. They're in a jovial mood, and their laughter settles over the softly lighted room into silence. It's the captain who says,
Speaking of things disappearing, I remember once seeing Houdini at the Hippodrome in New York cause an elephant to vanish right before my eyes.
Now, Captain, that sounds like an elephant fish story to me.
No, the captain's right. It was a sensation at the time.
A magician's trick, of course.
Yeah, but if you can tell me how it's done, by golly, I've been puzzling over that trick for years.
Well, I don't know how Houdini made an elephant disappear, but I do know how Randy Bradford vanished.
A story, Moore?
Sure, if you'd like it.
Indeed we would. But what's this? A man vanished, you say?
Yes, as if into thin air. From a party given by Kurt Ballard. Randy was a young newspaper man I once knew.
Yeah, but you're going to tell us how he vanished, ain't you?
Well, that's part of the story, Captain. Well, the night was raw and cold. The gray sky hung low. I braced myself against the wind as I turned the corner into that short east side street. It ended abruptly at the river's edge. In front of Kurt's house, several red lanterns were swinging from their hooks on a portable maze of pipes that fenced in a hole in the pavement. Although I didn't know it then, there were danger lights of warning. Once inside Kurt Ballard's house, a trim maid in uniform directed me up a short stairway to the second floor. It was a crowded, merry party. Patricia Kingston, a girl I had known for several years, an editor of a magazine, was sitting on a velvet-covered couch. Randy Bradford lay on the floor beside her, his feet concealed under the silk fringe of the sofa. Patricia and Randy were solemn in spite of the gay laughter in the room. I sat down beside her and said hello, and another maid lowered a tray of refreshments before me. I was just about to select a large, luscious-looking concoction, but she said, "Oh, no, that one is for Mr. Bradford." Randy told me, through a sleepy yawn, that Kurt made them only upon request. So we chatted a few minutes, and then I realized there was a strained trouble feeling between them, so I excused myself. Kurt was in an adjoining room. You know, he was something of a mystery. For although he was a wonderful host, nobody seemed to know much about him. Well, the party went on, and nothing unusual had happened. But just as I was saying goodbye, Patricia came in from the hallway. Her face had lost its color. "Randy's disappeared," she said. Kurt laughed. He said maybe Randy had gone home, which is where I was headed for the next minute. But I couldn't forget Patricia's white expression of alarm. It was almost as if she had seen a ghost. The next day was a rainy Saturday. About 4 o'clock the buzzer sounded and I opened the door to find Patricia, dripping wet, looking at me with wide, frightened eyes. "You've got to help me," she said. "Something terrible has happened to Randy. I don't know what, but I'm afraid." She then told me she had been to Randy's hotel. His bed hadn't been turned down, but in the desk she found a loose-leaf diary. "I brought along the page dated yesterday," she said, and pulled a folded sheet of paper from her coat pocket. "I cannot put this off," the diary read. "I think he realizes I know the truth. Tonight, after the party, I'm going to talk to him. Patricia must not know until it's over. Well, I asked whom he meant. She bit her lower lip nervously and hesitated. I think it's Kurt, she said. That's what upsets me, because now I'm afraid of Kurt. This last week, he's been like a stranger, vicious, full of hate for Randy. I don't know what to do, Dick. You see, Randy knows I'm secretly engaged to Kurt, and Kurt's murderously jealous of him. Then she told me that on the night of the party, just before I arrived, Randy said he had something to give her before the evening was over, something important. But shortly afterwards, when she looked for Randy, he was gone, without a word. Last night at the party, she said, Randy pushed off his shoes under the couch. Just before I came here today, I called at Kurt's. He wasn't there, but Randy's shoes were. Now, would a man as rational as we know Randy to be put on his coat and hat and go out into the cold winter night in his stocking feet? No, Dick. He must still be there, somewhere in that house. He must be dead. As the taxi pulled to a stop in front of Kurt's house, I remember thinking that the street looked different somehow, but I was more concerned with Patricia's anxiety. A butler opened the door, and we went in. In the front living room, she pointed to one end of the sofa. I reached under it, and my hand brushed over a shoe. I pulled it out, and further back I found the other one. Then I looked up and saw the butler in the doorway. He was staring at the shoes. He said, "Oh, I thought for a moment they were mine." He then told us that on the previous day, before leaving for the hospital to see his brother, he had left a pair of shoes just under the bed in his room on the 3rd floor. And when he returned the next morning, the shoes were gone. Both Randy must have left the house wearing the butler's shoes. But even that was mere speculation, and didn't tell us where he had gone. We then questioned the 2 maids who served at the party, but neither of them had seen Randy leave the house. And no doubt Patricia and I were thinking the same thing. No human being walks into a house and completely disappears. One of 3 things must have happened. He was still there, hiding, or he went out of his own free will, or somebody carried him out bodily. Patricia agreed that the first thing to do was to search the house thoroughly. So we did, from cellar to roof. We found nothing. And then we asked ourselves, did he walk out of his own accord wearing the butler's shoes? If so, why did he take the shoes? And how did he manage to disappear so completely? The third query was even more puzzling. For if somebody, namely Kurt, as Patricia obviously feared, had carried him out of the house, when had he done so? The party was in full swing when Randy vanished, and Kurt had been in evidence all evening. But thinking back over the night before, I remembered Randy yawning time and time again, sleepy yawns. And just then, as I was standing by the window looking out at the streaming rain, I saw something. Or rather, I didn't see something that quite clearly told me what had happened to Randy Bradford. At that moment, I felt a movement in the doorway. Patricia stood up. Her face turned pale with fright, for Kurt had arrived. He was staring at us with a sullen, puzzled expression in his eyes. I picked up the shoes. "These belong to Randy," I said. "We know where he is." Kurt didn't speak. He was thinking fast. He looked as guilty as anybody I've ever seen. Patricia saw it, too. She screamed and ran to my side, and Kurt, like an arrow, darted into the hallway and down the stairs. The next moment, the front door slammed. "Oh, let him go," I said. "We'll call the police." An hour later, the house was full of detectives. The rain had stopped, and darkness fell over the street as I told my version of what I believed had happened. Sometime the night before, after slipping off his shoes under the couch, Randy felt drowsy, and unnoticed he walked out of the room, up the stairs, and found his way to the butler's room on the 3rd floor. Maybe he thought to stay awake, but the drug in the refreshment Kurt had given him was too potent. You see, Kurt was making sure Randy would be unable to keep the after-party appointment. So Randy fell into a deep sleep on the butler's bed, and sometime during the party, Kurt found him, fetched his hat and coat from the closet, and stretched the coat like a blanket over the sleeping man. When the guests were gone, Kurt noticed Randy had removed his shoes, and thinking the pair by the bedside were his, Kurt slipped them on the sleeping man's feet. Then he picked him up and took him out into the deserted winter night. I looked out of the window. The street repairman had arrived. In a moment we heard their picks strike the newly laid pavement, and all of us filed out of the house, and stood grimly waiting as they dug the hole deeper and deeper. Patricia was silent, holding tightly to my arm. The shovels stopped. One of the men climbed out. "Yeah, he's there all right. Under the water main," he said. Patricia shuddered. Randy had been buried alive. He was wearing a butler's shoes. Later we learned that Kurt had questioned the workmen. He knew the repairing job would be finished on Friday, that the workmen were to fill in the excavation the next morning, which they did. Doubtless Kurt pushed Randy's body under the water main and covered it with a layer of soil. Well, they took his body to the morgue and the post-mortem told us he had been drugged. But a letter in Randy's pocket told us even more. It was what he intended to give Patricia that night. As I remembered, he wrote, Darling Patricia, when I began investigating Kurt Ballard, I never thought he'd turn out to be Frederick Judon, whose last 2 wives, both wealthy women, mysteriously died. That's why you cannot marry Kurt, and why I've made an appointment to talk with him tonight after the party. I'm going to tell him what I know, and hope he'll leave New York, and you. Because, you see, I've been in love with you, Patricia, ever since those days, so long ago, when we walked home together from school, and I held your hand. Didn't you suspect? Tonight, after I've talked with Kurt, I'll come by to see you. Wait for me. All my love, Randy. Well, gentlemen, when Patricia and I left the police station that night, the moon rode high in the midnight darkness. I didn't question her tears, and we walked silently up the long, deserted street, the echo of our footsteps following close behind us.
But did the police bring the murderer to justice?
3 weeks later, he was arrested at a seaport in Georgia, brought back for trial. But he never stood trial, Major. Alienists declared him insane.
For the record, Moore, what did you see from the window that told you where Randy's body was?
The newly patched pavement, Doctor.
Oh.
Yes, but if Patricia hadn't remembered the shoes, why, Randy might never have been found.
And the murderer would have gone scot-free. Well, you were quite a detective on that one, Moore.
Yes, indeed. Well, with Patricia's help and a little imagination.
Maybe you have some ideas about how that elephant of Houdini's vanished. I'd be mighty grateful, Moore, if you'd put your detecting mind on that one.
All right, Captain.
The fire has burned to glowing embers, and the room is almost dark as the 3 men take leave of Dr. Avillo. The door closes, but they'll be back soon for another exciting story, so plan to be with them when they meet again and talk again, and invite you to stand by for adventure.
Okay, Frank, if you can hold that slide for a couple minutes, or
Yes.
just a little bit before we go on to the next slide, great.
Sure.
Okay, so there we are. There's the living room where the story was told, and I've written down the names of the actors. The host was Joseph DeSantis. He was Dr. Juan Avillo, standing there with a knife. I was going to play the knife episode. They have an episode called The Knife, but the audio was terrible, and there's no way I was going to be able to do that. So I had to pick Buried Alive was the episode that we just heard. I don't know what number it is. I just really started to work on Standby for Adventure. And so as a transcribed program that was syndicated over several years, there's no specific broadcast dates, but we do have episodes for a few, and I'm still working on a log. You probably recognize the voices of Parker Fennelly there on the left. He was Captain Quigley. He's probably best known for the spokesman of Pepperidge Farms, those advertisements in the 60s and 70s. And on the right, Edward Jerome, he was Major Gordon, and the person who presented the story for the evening. You know, that the group rotated around each episode. John Moore, he was Richard Moore, the reporter. And all 4 of these individuals were major players in New York radio at that time in the 40s. Parker Fennelly was Henry Foster, a longtime editor of the Valley Sentinel in one of my favorite soap operas, Mary Foster, the editor's daughter. I may play one of those in a future First 15. John Moore was in a lot of soap operas. Ed Jerome and Joe DeSantis were in soap operas, but they're in many major nighttime dramas: Mr. District Attorney, Cavalcade of America, Gangbusters, Counter Spy, etc. Okay, now on to the next slide. And on the left, we have Burt Wood. He was the producer-director. He started his career as an engineer and then moved into production. And Burt Wood is one of those unsung production staff members who we need to know more about. He did many of the NBC transcribed syndicated programs, and I thought he did a really good job, in production. On the right, Arnold Moss. Maybe if you may recognize that voice. Moss was very well known on stage and in radio. And if you're a Star Trek fan, as I am, he played Anton Tridion in The Conscience of the King, that first Star Trek episode from the first season. And on to the next slide, we have the writers. Now, as a researcher, it's very difficult to get photos of writers. For whatever reason, these people just, they weren't publicized, or they just, kind of went into the woodwork or whatever, hid behind typewriters and closed offices. But in the NBC brochure, Stand By for Adventure, they gave photos of 4 of the writers, and these are 2 of them, Raphael Hayes and Horace Gold. These are major writers in New York at the time on various programs, Mole Mystery Theater, Murder at Midnight. And then if we move on to the next slide, yes, we even have a woman here, yes. Marjorie Camp, very interested in her. She was a writer at various stations in New York. She did an excellent program at WMCA. Let's Listen to a Strange Tale was the title of that. So her writings in adventure programs were very well known. And then on the right, Steve Carlin. Many of you may know him from TV later in the 60s, where he was involved in $64,000 Question and many of those TV shows. At that time, in the mid-1940s, Carlin was the head of the continuity department or writing department of NBC Radio Recording Division. And Frank, hopefully I'll be able to get the birthdays for some of these people, and we'll get those to you for future Facebook posts for the club's Facebook page.
Thank you.
And you bet. And on to the next slide. There's many sponsors for Stand By for Adventure. And so I've just got a couple of ads here on the left. There's one from Boise, Idaho. It's on KIDO, Kiddo, of course. And some of the ads included the title of the program, The Man Who Hated Birthdays. So I'm not sure if we have that episode as extent or not. And then on the right, from Honolulu's KGU, they were sponsored by 7-Up bottling company in their Sunrise Soda Works in Honolulu. There's many different sponsors of all different types, as you can imagine. The program was on. It could be really aired at almost any time during the day by various stations. So let's move on to the next slide. There is audio available in various forms, and it's not all that great on various websites. Old Time Radio Researchers, Radio Echoes, and also the Old Time Radio Downloads. Maybe many of you may be already familiar with these websites. Scripts, I have not been able to find any scripts of the program so far. Scripts for syndicated series are very difficult to locate. For whatever reason, maybe they just weren't saved by the individual authors or the network. And they usually weren't copyrighted either, which I find interesting. And that's the next slide. So there's always critique. I thought the overall production was good, and it's interesting that they would have a question and answer session at the end. The other 3 participants there in the Dr. Vio's living room would ask the presenter various questions. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of the program. And of course, I think it would be nice if they added, from time to time, one woman to the group to give a different perspective. Additional sources for storytelling and radio. We're all here to tell a story. I'm telling a story right now about this program, and so each drama, tells a story. Tim DeForest, Jeff Porter, and John Pavlik have published very interesting books on various avenues of storytelling in radio and pulps and comics. So if some of you may already have some of these are really excellent books if you're really into the storytelling aspects and just more of the academic aspect. And finally, there's my mugshot on the left and my email if you have any questions. The program was still promoted late 1940s into the 1950s in such publications as the Radio Daily Shows Up Tomorrow. They were still promoting the storytelling aspect with all 4 of the actors listed. They have 78 episodes. So that's the goal, is to get at least titles, if not audio, of all those episodes. The program was on until about 1957 is the last station that I've been able to locate. Any questions? I want to thank Frank for running the slides and for John Abbott for cleaning up that Buried Alive episode. It sounded a lot better than it did when I sent it to him. So thank you, Frank and John.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Karl. That was wonderful. I was struck by the complexity of the storyline. I didn't expect that, but it really, they really had an interesting I thought anyway, an interesting mystery to solve. And they, even when it was solved, it was complicated. So thank you for introducing me anyway to that series. I will look up some more in the future.
Certainly. And if anybody has any suggestions for other first 15s, I'm always open to suggestions from the members. If you have a favorite 15 or you discover a program that you want profiled as a first 15, just let me know.
Wendy, I don't know if you see it, there's a hand up.
Charles?
Yeah, I have a question for Carl. It's a little bit off of the program. Carl, this is Charles Nairn here. I'm just wondering.
Charles, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I just wondered if you ever found any of the WGRC programs you were looking for.
Not yet. I'm still looking.
I'm still looking for you. I'm telling you.
Okay.
The reason for that, they were done out of Louisville, and that's where I'm at.
Right. Do you still have the same email?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'll email you about that because I know we haven't touched base in a long time. So good to hear from you, Charles.
Okay, good enough. Good to hear you.
Wendy?
Yes, Frank.
The phone 1623 had their hand up. They don't have it up now, but I believe they had a question. They're on the phone.
All right. They are on. They've unmuted. Go ahead.
It's Joni Leonard.
Oh, great.
My question is, the Standby for Adventure, does it have a connection with Standby for Crime?
No. There were many different programs that were standby, that had standby in the title and adventure, but Standby for Crime was from the 1950s, late 40s or 1950s, produced on the West Coast, and it starred Glenn Langan, I believe, and Adele Jurgens. And yeah, there's no connection.
Thank you very much.
Certainly.
Anyone else have any questions or curiosities for Carl?
I guess I have one question for Carl. Carl, Parker Fennelly, of course, was on with Fred Allen.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He, obviously when Allen was in New York, I guess Allen was in New York for most of the time, wasn't he? He didn't go to Hollywood.
Yes, he was. No, he was in. He might have been out in Hollywood for engagements or films or something. But no, he stayed in New York. In fact, he died in New York on the street in 1958. I mean, that's a very sad story. He was out walking and boom, he died of a heart attack, and that was the end of Fred Allen. I mean, that was really sad. But yeah, he was in New York for most of his life. Yeah.
But a lot of these actors, would they fly from New York to California to do programs?
It all depended upon what they were involved in. During the war, people moved around a lot. They, people who were in the armed services, armed forces, you could hear them on one program. I think you're referring to Bob Dryden, right? From we discussed this earlier. Bob Dryden was a radio actor in New York, and I heard him on the Damon Runyon Theater in 1948. Somehow he was out in Hollywood, and I don't know why. Maybe perhaps for an engagement, for a film screening, or something. About actors move around. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, because I think too some of them went from Chicago to New York and back and forth.
Oh yes,
as well.
Yes, some did. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Certainly.
I don't see any other hands raised. Do you see any, Frank?
No.
Okay, great. Well, Carl, thank you so much, and especially
Certainly.
being the walking wounded with your cold and everything. Take good care of yourself.
Yeah, work won't allow that, but I'll try.
All right. Drink lots of orange juice or something.
Absolutely, OJ. I'm an OJ man. That's right.
Good stuff. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that was just delightful. So now we come to the quiz portion of the program. I see Sally Stevens on the screen. Are you our quiz mistress this evening, Sally?
Well, I would like to first take an opportunity to introduce our quiz queens because I have carried the quizzes for over 5 years. And this is something that was given to me, shall we say. And so I am happily spreading some of that love and have assembled a wonderful team to be the quiz queens. So you will always be in mystery of which wonderful quiz queen will be presenting the quiz at any time. Now, class, let me be clear. Just because there are co-teachers does not mean you get to slack off, you don't get to do your homework, and you don't get to study. Am I clear, class?
Yes, Miss Stevens. So for the purposes of helping with the tech, need to know which one is going to be launching the poll tonight.
For this evening, our quiz queen is Miss Kelly Gray.
Yay.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello.
Excellent work. So I will make you a co-host now, Kelly, so we can move on with vigor, as the expression used to be.
Yes, yes.
And there you go.
Thank you very much. And now, Frank, you sent me the quiz. I don't know that you sent me. Do I need any kind of a code or?
You just need to log. You need to go to polls on your screen.
Yes.
And launch the poll that is available to you, which should be called Relatively Speaking.
I have launched the poll.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. Yes. Hello, everybody. I am the February quiz queen. Part of our team. And let me read these. The theme, of course, is focusing on the relatives of some of our favorite shows. So here we go. Question 1. Mrs. Davis, Connie Brooks's landlady, had a sister who Mrs. Davis often said was absent-minded. What was her sister's name? A, Angela, B, Arlene, C, Alma, and D, Alice. So on our Miss Brooks, what was the name of Mrs. Davis's absent-minded sister? Angela, A, Angela, B, Arlene, C, Alma, or D, Alice? Question 2. Blanche Bickerson had a shiftless brother, Amos, but she also had a sister. What was her sister's name? A, Ethel, B, Clara, C, Eva, or D, Dinah? And again, what was the name of Blanche Bickerson's sister? A, Ethel, B, Clara, C, Eva, or D, Dinah? Question 3. On the Phil Harris and Alice Faye program, Alice had a brother named Willie. Who played Willie? A, Robert North, B, Arnold East, C, Stephen South, or D, David West? Again, on the Phil Harris and Alice Faye program, who played Alice's brother Willie? A, Robert North, B, Arnold East, C, Stephen South, or D, David West? Question 4. On Vic and Sade, Sade had a relative referred to as Uncle Fletcher, played by Clarence Hartzell. What was Uncle Fletcher's surname? A. Gummer, B. Feeple, C. Rush, or D. Dowd? Again, on Vic and Sade, Sade had a relative, Uncle Fletcher. What was Uncle Fletcher's last name? Was it A. Gummer, B. Feeple, C. Rush, or D. Dowd? Moving along. Question 5. Osgood Conklin had a teenage daughter named Harriet. His wife also appeared in many episodes. What was her first name? A. Melinda, B. Matilda, C. Magda, or D. Martha? Again, on Aramis Brooks, Osgood Conklin, his wife appeared in many episodes. Her first name, was it A. Melinda, B. Matilda, C. Magda, or D. Martha? Question 6. In a humorous episode of Gunsmoke titled Marshal Proudfoot, Chester's father comes to Dodge with the impression from Chester's letters that he is the marshal. How many brothers does he say that Chester has? A. 9, B. 10, C. 11, or D. 12? And again, in a humorous episode of Gunsmoke entitled Marshal Proudfoot, Chester's father comes to Dodge with the impression from Chester's letters that he is the marshal. How many brothers does he say Chester has? A is 9, B 10, C 11, or D 12? Question 7. On a date with Judy, Judy had a brother. What was his name? A. Randolph, B. Mortimer, C. John, or D. Jester? And again, on the show A Date with Judy, what was Judy's brother's name? A. Randolph, B. Mortimer, C. John, or D. Jester? Question 8. Leroy and Marjorie were Gildersleeve's sister's children. What was their surname? A. Farmer, B. Gardner, C. Forrester, D. Huntsman? With the great Gildersleeve, the last name of Gildersleeve's niece and nephew, Leroy and Marjorie, A. Farmer, B. Gardner, C. Forrester, or D. Huntsman? And in a great episode of The Green Hornet, Britt's double identity as the Hornet is revealed to his father. What was his father's given name? A. Dan, B. Don, C. John, D. Sean? In a great episode of The Green Hornet, Britt's double identity as the Hornet is revealed to his father. What was his father's given name? A. Dan, B. Don, C. John, and D. Sean? And last but not least, question 10. On Flywheel, Shyster, and Flywheel, for 26 weeks, Groucho Marx played a lawyer. Which of his brothers played his assistant? Was it A. Chico, B. Harpo, C. Gummo, or D. Zeppo? So, on Flywheel, Shyster, and Flywheel, for 26 weeks, Groucho Marx played a lawyer. Which of his brothers played his assistant? A. Chico, B. Harpo, C. Gummo, or D. Zeppo? And the answers will be revealed at the end of the evening.
Thank you very much, Miss Gray. Excellently well done. I wait with bated breath to hear the answers. So now we will move along, and now Frank is back. Can go back to adding B. Benaderet to an option in some of his answers.
Whoa.
Well, maybe that'll give you a reason to tell me what you're up to.
Let's watch it here, okay?
Excuse me,
wild.
Miss Stevens.
Wild here.
Excuse me. All right, so now we're coming to the main portion of the evening. And Frank, you can introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Wendy. Larry, first I'm going to tell you, make sure you unmute. Our speaker tonight is Larry Zdeb, and this is Larry's second time that he's joined us. You may recall last year he made a presentation for us on Captain Midnight. Larry is an author, presenter, and a collector, as you're going to see, of, I can't imagine anyone has a finer collection than Larry of old-time radio memorabilia. And he's got a number of slides, and he's going to describe for us those slides. So Larry, if you're ready, I'll put this up on the screen. Let's see, we're not sharing that yet, are we?
Nope.
Okay. Let's see.
Well, you don't have to put the first picture up yet if you don't want to. It's the one with the space.
I'll get it up there. All right. Can everybody see that now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, Larry, the first slide Larry has there is just an introduction that I put on there for Larry with old time radio premiums and other memorabilia. So Larry, first slide if you're ready.
Well, the subject is radio premiums, and I'm an award-winning artist and a radio historian. And so you can go to the first picture. The discussion will be in two parts. Part one is how I started collecting, and part two is the history of radio premiums. So someone might ask the question, why are there radio premiums? A WXYZ folder once stated that the purpose of a radio premium was to determine the immediate self-producing power of the program and to gauge audience interest. And I'm adding, and also to sell more of the sponsor's product. So when I was a child, I had no idea I was going to become a radio historian. I wanted to be an artist. So this is how I began collecting, becoming a collector. When I went to, my mother and I went to the grocery store, and I didn't expect this, but parked outside the grocery store was the Rocky Jones spaceship. And I couldn't believe my eyes. Here's this thing I saw on television. I used to watch the television show. And here was the rocket. And all you had to do to go on the rocket was to buy a loaf of silver cup bread. So my mother bought me the bread. And I got to go on a spaceship. You entered the back door. And when you walked in, it was just like you'd imagine a spaceship to be. There was oxygen tanks, bunks. And when you walked toward the front, there was the cockpit. Pilot seat, co-pilot seat with all kinds of flashing lights. It was the most glorious thing you could ever want to be in. And I could have stayed longer, and there weren't many kids in there. It might have been only one other kid. And I might have only stayed there for 10 minutes. I wish I stayed a half an hour. But I was only in there for about 10 minutes. And then I exited out the front, and I was handed, go to the next slide. I was handed this card, which shows I was on the Silver Moon spaceship, and they gave me a miniature loaf of silver cup bread. So that was probably the most memorable event in my childhood. I got to go on a Rocky Jones spaceship. I don't think many people were granted that privilege. So go to the next slide now. When I was a kid, this is the kind of premium. I didn't really collect them. I just had them. You had a box of cereal, and there would be these cars in there. And I had a few of them. I didn't really consider it a collection, but I had some. And there were other things other than cars. I remember a rocket ship that you push the button and it would shoot off. I like things like that. Go to the next slide. The only premium I ever sent away for was the Kellogg Skin Diver. This was about 9 inches long black skin diver that had a tube attached to this bulb. And the idea was you put this in water, and I used a bathtub, and you squeeze the bulb and his leg would move, propelling him through the water. And then if you squeeze the bulb really hard, it would shoot a harpoon. So I put it in the bathtub and I made him swim a little bit, and I squeezed it really hard, and the harpoon shot out and hit a bar of ivory soap floating on the surface. I lost interest in this premium probably the day that I used it. I just felt it was just so impractical. Every time I wanted to use it, I'd have to fill the bathtub. So anyway, I used it maybe once and then forgot about it. But it was the only premium as a kid I ever sent away for. And it's a rare one today to find. I don't even have it. I'd like to have one. Next slide. I still have one thing from my childhood. This is me on my front porch with my Jerry Mahoney ventriloquist doll. Believe it or not, through all these years, 70 years later, go to the next slide. Here I am with Jerry on my porch. I feel he's almost a member of the family. So I graduated from high school and I actually went into the Air Force. Next slide. And here I am in the Air Force, and I was an artist in the Air Force. I didn't realize they needed artists, but they do. Someone had to make charts and do slides for pilots. Well, that was my job. So I spent a little over 3.5 years in the Air Force, and I got out to go to college. So I went to college for a full year. Next slide. I got married, and I never really thought I would be a collector or anything, but I had a friend from high school who lived in East Lansing, Michigan, and it's about a 2-hour drive from my house. And he invited me up there. He said, there's this shop up there. You just have to go in there. It's the greatest shop you've ever seen. And I trusted him. And I went up there, and he took me to the shop, and it was called the Curious Bookshop. Curious Bookshop. And I walked in there, and I couldn't believe my eyes. There were stacks of comic books, pulps, collectibles of every kind in a huge room. I never dreamed that anybody ever saved a comic book. I had them as a kid, but I never dreamed that anyone actually saved them. And my eyes popped. I guess anybody's eyes would have popped if you saw that. And pinned to the wall was this mask. And it had a price tag of $1 on it. And I thought, I gotta buy that. It's so cool looking. It turns out it's a 1934 mask from the World's Fair of Ed Wynn from the Texaco exhibit. Next slide. I also bought a comic book while I was there. So I walked out with the Ed Wynn mask and a Flash comic book. So I got interested in premiums now that I had that, and I started going to flea markets, antique shows, and toy shows. In 1977, Tom Tumbush started making these price guides for premiums. And this is what really got everyone going, because here it was, these beautiful covers. I never dreamed anyone could own this many premiums. And inside had all the prices of what they should be worth and all the known premiums at the time. So premiums really started taking off after this premium price guide came out. And he also made several other ones later after this one. There were also fanzines that people did about premiums. And here's one by Rex Miller. I actually did some articles for him. So now I've been collecting, and from the 70s, and now it's in the 2000s. And you can go to the next slide.
The one that's up right now is the one of Captain Midnight, the nostalgia
Oh,
illustrated.
okay. Oh, I didn't know you. Okay. Well, go back to the one with Breakfast Club.
Okay, that's the next one.
Okay.
You ready for that?
Yes. So now it's the 2000s, and I have this huge collection, and I went to Facebook to try to find some information about premiums, and there was nothing. And anyone can start a group on Facebook, so I said, well, I'll start a group. I'll call it Radio Premiums. A real simple name, everyone can find it. And it started out slow, but all of a sudden I started getting a lot of other people who had the same ideas as I did, and I got to meet all these collectors who I never knew existed. And it was amazing. And one of the collectors I met was a guy named John Gothold. Next slide. This is his Captain Midnight collection. A lot of times collectors don't take the time to set their stuff out like this. And this is a glorious picture of a Captain Midnight collection. Well, I also have a great Captain Midnight collection, and I had so much stuff that, next picture, I actually wrote a 2-volume set about Captain Midnight called Captain Midnight, The Definitive Guide. These are telephone book sized books. This is volume 1. Next picture. This is volume 2. They're both available on Amazon. So that's the history of how I got into doing premiums. The second part of the talk will be about the history of premiums. I actually picked premiums that were unusual and had a story to them, and I felt that they would be of interest to non-collectors. Next picture. So the radio premiums couldn't have existed before 1920. This is WWJ, and they first broadcast in August of 1920 out of Detroit. And radio premiums couldn't have existed before 1921. There were no shows that they're like musical shows, but there weren't any top shows. That took a while for them to develop. So on my site, Radio Premiums, someone asked the question, next slide, what's the oldest radio premium? So John Gothold and I, we take that as a challenge for someone. We figure that we're radio detectives. We have to find out the answer. So John scoured his collection, and he came up with this card, and we made a rule that the premium that we found had to be dated, because there's a lot of old premiums, but they're not dated. So John found one from 1924, Jack and Jill Club, and he's got a pinback. As far as I know, that's the oldest pinback. So when John had one from 1924, that was a challenge to me. So I had to look for one. So go to the next slide. I found one from 1922. This one is dated March 15th. It's from the Oakland Tribune. And it's from the Oakland Tribune Radio Club. Next picture. Here's a close-up. So it's dated March 15th, 1922. So as of right now, until someone can find an earlier date, it's got to be dated though. You got to beat March 15th, 1922. So right now, this is the oldest radio premium. Next slide. RCA radio stores offered this beautiful cardboard fan. with just glorious artwork on it. Next slide. One of the earliest personalities on the radio was Uncle Bob. And he had this club called The Curb is the Limit. Actually, Uncle Bob started in 1921. So this card could be from 21, but since it's not dated, it's not, we can't verify that it is. So it's just an old card that could be as early as 1921. Next slide. This is the Laugh in Your Dream Club. This is a crazy, wild, beautiful card with its electric lettering that says the Laugh in Your Dream Club. Signed by Mrs. Leon Coulter, the Tell Me a Story lady. Eugene is a Laugh in Your Dream kitty of WDAF, Kansas City. This is one of the best looking old time radio membership cards. Next picture. Here we go back with the Oakland Tribune again. The oldest premium was the certificate. Now here's one from 1927 from the Lake Merritt Ducks of KLX. And this membership card is signed by the Big Duck. And it's dated January 1st, 1927. This is one of the craziest cards you're ever going to find. And I happen to find it. Next slide. This is a typical radio premium from the 30s, from the 20s. It's the Pops Pirate Club. You got a letter, a nice pen, and it came in an illustrated envelope. A typical 1920s radio club. Next. This one is kind of a quiz for all you radio people out there. This is an Air Scouts Club card dated May 24th, 1928. And it's, you don't think much of it. It just looks okay. It's just another radio premium, but there is something very special about this one. At the bottom, it's signed by two people, Marion and Jim. Now I want everyone to think about this and tell me who those people are. I can tell you who they are by giving you their last name, but I want you to think about it before I give you the last names. So here we are, a card from 1928 from the Air Scouts signed by Marion and Jim Jordan.
Yeah.
Who became Fibber, McGee, and Molly later on. A very historic card. Next. Here's another beautiful card from the 20s, from NBC, the Magic Circle, the Lady Next Door. These 1920s premiums are just glorious. Next. 1931, Orphan Annie offered these beautiful pinbacks. You voted for which kind, the way you liked Ovaltine, and if you picked one way, you'd get the oval, you get the Orphan Annie pin, and if you voted another way, you get the Joe Cord tassel. Next. I went to an estate sale about 5 years ago, and there was a stack of old photographs from movie stars and radio stars. I don't think the people who ran the estate sale knew who these people were. They didn't know who this guy was, and they probably couldn't figure out his signature. Well, of course, I knew exactly what it was, and it was marked $5, and so I had to grab it. And so it's a postcard, and this is what's so cool about radio premium postcards. When they're postmarked, you know exactly when this came out. So this postcard, if you turn it over, it's dated It's postmarked July 10th, 1932, from Long Island City, New York. This is like 2 months after Jack Benny started on the radio. And I've got this postcard signed by Jack Benny, part of my collection. Next slide. Here's a guy you might recognize from the WMAL Breakfast Club, signed by Arthur Godfrey. And it's from 1933. Next slide. This is one of the first radio codes. Orphan Annie in 1934 came out with this manual, and you got a pin with it. And inside the manual, it was like a paper decoder that showed you how to decode messages. Orphan Annie was one of the first, in my opinion, it's the first show that actually had codes in regularity on the radio. Orphan Annie had premium manuals like this every year from 1934 to 1940. The ones after 1934 all had a metal decoder that came with them, and you didn't have to use the manual to make the to decode the messages. Next. This might be the first Fibber, McGee and Molly premium. It's a printer's proof. It says, "Meet radio's newest stars." And here they are bursting out of the poster. And it shows that it's a Monday evening show. Fibber, McGee and Molly for Johnson's Wax Polishes. This is one of my best premiums. I very rarely show it. Next. This is one of the best Fibber, McGee and Molly premiums. They're spinners that are little toys that you just took and spin. They're just a toy that you would spin. Kids like to play with spinners. Next. They even put Fibber, McGee and Molly on cans of Glow Coat. Next. In the early 30s, Tom Mix radio show offered this mask. It's one of the hardest premiums to find. One of the reasons is, well, it's made of paper it's like a heavy paper. It's not even cardboard. It's a premium that would self-destruct if you wore it. So these are very hard to find. I happen to have one, and this is mine. Next. This is another Tom Mix premium. This is called a zip gun, and you could definitely put your eye out with this one. It had a really strong spring on it, and you'd put that suction cup on, and you'd pull that big lever, and it would shoot that thing, and you could really put your eye out with it. Next. Tom Mix also offered a couple of guns that look so realistic. They're made of wood. This is one of the most quality premiums. I can't believe that they could give these out as a premium. They're so well done. The one on the top has a revolving chamber on it, and it breaks apart. It's just like a real gun. It's really amazing premium. Next. The Buck Rogers show had one of the best looking manuals. And you also got a pin with this in a Solar Scout envelope. The next one, then this is the most unusual premium of all time. Tom Mix gave away a real live baby turtle. We wouldn't have known about this premium if it wasn't for the newspaper ad. Next. Here's a blow up of the turtle. What they did was they put a decal on a turtle and they mailed it to kids. And no one has one. It's impossible to have one because the turtle would have died and no one was going to save the shell. And I think the decal would have fallen off once the the turtle was in the water for a while. I don't know how long these turtles lived, but this ad was from 1937. I don't think there's any around today. Next. This is a beautiful pin, and there's quite a bit of, there's a good story with this one. The NBC Animal News Club. And it's not only is it a good looking pin, but there's a great story. Lou Rogers was actually a woman. Her name was Annie Lucasta Rogers, and she was a fabulous artist. And she was doing magazine articles, but under her name of Annie, this was kind of like sexism back then. Readers didn't like cartoons. The way I understand it, they weren't very much in favor of ones drawn by a woman. So she changed her name to Lou. And when she changed her name, all of a sudden her work started becoming really popular. So this NBC Animal News Club with Lou Rogers, I think most people assume that Lou Rogers is a man, but Lou Rogers is a woman. And she ended up with having a radio show. And they had actors who played the part of the animals. They made animal sounds. So it's a very unusual show, and it's a very interesting. The story for Lou Rogers, I could do a whole program on Lou Rogers. She's so famous. But that was Lou Rogers' pin, and it's a beauty. Next. Charlie McCarthy was huge in the late 30s, and Chase and Sanborn offered this beautiful, large cardboard ventriloquist dummy of Charlie. His eyes moved and his mouth moved. And they also made one of Mortimer. You can you fold the legs down and put them on your lap, and you can pretend you're Edgar Bergen. Next. The Green Hornet in the Michigan area offered these glasses from the Golden Jersey Milk. And what they had in these was cottage cheese. And kids went crazy for these glasses. There were 4 of them in the set. There was Green Hornet, Cato, Miss Case, and Mike Axford. Next. Even the cheap Jack Benny offered a premium. Jack and Mary's Jell-O recipe book. Next. Here's a Joey Brown Post Toasties ticket in the ticket holder. Next. Lum and Abner offered a badge that would predict the weather. A walk-in weather prophet badge. Next. This is the tiniest radio premium. It looks big in the picture, but this is really tiny. You could probably set it on a dime. It's from the radio show 20 Questions. It's got a beautiful mutual microphone on this. I think it was given to people, if you sent a question into the radio show and it was read over the air, I think you'd get this beautiful pin. Really hard to find. Next. This is the wackiest club I've ever heard of. Uncle Don, Easy Underwear Radio Club. Uncle Don sponsored a lot of products, maybe 20 of them, but the Easy Underwear Radio Club, what are they thinking? This is the craziest pin. I don't know if you've ever heard anything for the Underwear Radio Club, but I'd sure like to hear one of these shows. Next. Helen Trent, soap opera, offered this beautiful radio pin with a nice dial in the center that when you turned it clockwise, the picture revolved and there were 5 different radio cast members that you could see pictures of. Next. One of my favorite shows. They didn't offer a lot of premiums, but this is the best one. Vic and Sade. This is the Vic and Sade map, and it has the original envelope with it. It says it's from Rush and Victor Gook in Cincinnati, Ohio. Next. This is the show that I know most about. I'm sure I know more about Captain Midnight than anybody on Earth. On October 1938, Skelly began sponsoring Captain Midnight. And they would offer premiums at the gas station. You didn't send away for them. You went to the gas station, they would offer it on the radio, and they would say, go to your station and pick up your membership card. And once you had your membership card, you could go back, and every time they offered another premium, you'd show the attendant your membership card. And he would hand you the premium. I estimate there was 4,000 Skelly stations in the Midwest in the late 1930s. But only about 1,800 of them actually wanted to participate in the Captain Midnight Flight Patrol. I think the reason was the gas station operators, the ones who didn't belong to the flight patrol, they just didn't want to be bothered by having kids come in all the time. And so the stations, the 1,800 that did, can you imagine the gas station attendant? There might be only one working at a Skelly gas station, if there was, and he's working, changing the oil on a car, and a kid comes into the office and asks for his membership card or the latest premium, and he's got to wipe his hands off and go in there and hand the thing to the kid and send him on his way, and then go back to the car and finish changing the oil. Or a car comes in to get gasoline, and it just was a pain for these guys to actually take care of these kids. So Skelly actually came up with a very ingenious idea to solve this problem about the gas station operators. Next slide. They came up with a pin called the Captain Midnight Flight Patrol Commander. The idea for this was there was only one badge per gas station that got one of these. They got a local kid who the gas station operators happened to know. He convinced the kid to sit in the gas station and hand out the premiums while he was working. And the kid could do it because he got this beautiful badge. And I think that back then the kids must have thought this guy was a celebrity because he had this Captain Midnight Flight Patrol Commander badge. And no one else had one. No one else could have one because there was only one per station. And if you only had one Skelly gas station in your neighborhood, he was the only kid in town who had one. This is one of the rarest premiums, and I'm lucky to have one. Next. This is another crazy premium that no one else seems to have. They might have the target, but no one else has the jumping beans. These are 1939 jumping beans in the envelope. The idea was, for this premium, you warmed up the jumping beans and put them in the center, and you could have as many as 5 kids playing. And the kid whose jumping bead made it to the outer edge first ended this particular game, and then they added up the scores. And actually, the kid with the lowest score would win. So this is a premium that no one has first of all, hardly anyone has the envelope, but no one else has the actual jumping beans. Next. I even have a Joe Penner Christmas card. He's there with his duck Goo-Goo. Next. The Hermit's Cave. Olga Cole offered three of these, three different folders. So it was a mystery show, and it's really a good, one of my favorite shows. And all these three are different, and they were radio premiums from the Hermit's Cave. Kind of an unusual premium from an unusual show. Next. This is a bust offered by Ovaltine for a show called Carters of Elm Street. And this statue, this little bust, is a bust of actually Virginia Payne. She played Carrie Carter on this show, but most people know her as Ma Perkins. This is the only one known. I got this from the Ovaltine archives. It's Virginia Payne as Carrie Carter. Next. If you were at the World's Fair in 1939, you might see a lot of kids wearing this hat that they sold there at the fair. These are in the World's Fair colors of orange and blue. The Lone Ranger sailor hat. Next. If your father bought a ton of blue coal for the home, he might have asked the driver to give him a pack of matches, and here we have it, a pack of Shadow matches, unused. Next. Grocery stores had this Don Winslow periscope, and these didn't last very long because this is made of cardboard and it's so large that it's hard to save. So there's not a lot of them out there right now, but I happen to have one. Nice graphics on the Don Winslow periscope. Next. I'm the only one that has a complete set of 1940 Captain Midnight Christmas cards. There were 10 of them in the set. They have no Captain Midnight written on them anywhere. The only place it says Captain Midnight is on the return envelope. And I have the radio show where they offered these. It was only offered for one day nationally. And then like a week later, they offered it in the Chicago area. So it was only offered on the radio twice. And no one else has a set. It's the only set known. Next. In 1941, Captain Midnight has replaced now Orphan Annie and is picking up where Orphan Annie left off with a manual and decoders where you could decode the messages at the end of the Captain Midnight episode. There weren't messages at the end of every episode. I would estimate the average week perhaps had 2 or 3 messages. They weren't on every episode. Some people might think they were, but they weren't. Some weeks could go without a message at all, and some weeks there could be messages every day, but it would average out to be 2 or 3 a week. Next. This is a 1941 Tom Mix membership kit. To give you an idea, Tom Mix also had a metal decoder. Well, it's in simpler design than the Captain Midnight. I think they felt that maybe the Tom Mix listeners were a little younger than the Captain Midnight ones, and they couldn't handle a more complicated decoder. Next. Grocery stores during the war offered this Weber bread on the West Coast, and there was a picture of the Lone Ranger on it. So I've got this wrapper, and it's like has a piece of sponge rubber in the middle to replicate the bread. So it looks like a loaf of bread, and it's in my collection. Next. This radio premium had this had the most play value of almost any premium. It's a Jack Armstrong bomb sight. You loaded the 3 bombs in the bottom. You looked in the viewer, and you turned the little green dial on the bottom, and you would release the bomb onto one of these paper targets of a ship. They were meant to be cut out. Mine isn't cut out, but I could imagine this would have the most play value, and it was all made of materials that weren't critical for the war. There was no metal parts on this at all. It was all wood, and there was a mirror. The only metal part was a little nail holding the green bottom dial on. One little nail. Next. Here's a picture of Uncle Jim and Jack Armstrong trying to figure out how to use their bomb sight. Next. Here's another Jack Armstrong premium. It's a Sky Ranger airplane. There was a lot of premiums that when you used them, you'd ruin them. This one had a propeller on the front with a rubber band running through the fuselage going to the tail. Had aluminum wings and a cardboard tube body. You'd wind it up 100 times, the propeller, and let it go, and it would take off and come crashing to the ground. It probably was good for 5 flights before it was totally broken. So there's hardly any that exists today. Next. It's Valentine's Day. I thought I would add a Lone Ranger Valentine's card for Valentine's Day. Red Ryder in World War II offered this cardboard flight patrol glow-in-the-dark pin. It wasn't made of metal because it was the wartime. It was made of like a pressed cardboard. It glows in the dark really nicely. Next. Kay Kaiser offered a premium. This is a beautiful premium of the diploma, and it comes with the original mailing tube, and that has a verified signature on the bottom of Kay Kaiser. He signed it. I don't think anyone else has one of these. Next. Grocery stores carrying craft products, 1942, would have had these jar tops from the new show, The Great Gildersleeve. These are all different. There's something different about each one of these. And they're part of my collection. Next. This is a show that a lot of people love. Inner Sanctum had a blotter. And the blotter even shows the squeaking door. Next. The Whistler also had a blotter. And this one's from WJR, but I know of other ones from other radio stations. Next. Soap opera, When a Girl Marries, offered a blotter. Next. Grocery stores would have here's an example of something you wouldn't expect really in a premium, but you'd go to a grocery store and you'd see these Poached Grape Nuts Flakes cereal boxes on the shelf. But when you turned them over, go to the next picture, you'd see that there on the back was an Aldrich family cartoon. Next. Plum and Abner again offered, they had a few of these Pine Ridge Navy certificates made up, and they gave them out to their friends. I don't think this was a premium that was offered to the public. I do believe that it was just by Lum and Abner to give to their friends. Lum and Abner signed it at the bottom, and they wrote the name of the person who was receiving it. It was a friend of theirs, Chester Cleveland. And they gave him this certificate dated 25th of November, 1947. The inside joke about this is that Pine Ridge, Arkansas is a landlocked state. It has no need for a Navy, but this is one of the wacky things you'd find on radio. They offered an Admiral certificate from Lum and Abner. Next. Talk about some crazy premium for a radio show. You'd never think that the Lone Ranger would offer an atom bomb ring, but he certainly did. The idea of this ring was to take the back of it, the red part off and look inside in a dark room and you'd see flashes of light. My friend Eugene Smith had one as a kid, and he said it did work like they say it would. He took the back end off and he saw these little light flashes. I think this was popular at the time because this is about the same time that they had those atom bomb tests on the Bikini Islands in the Pacific. This is probably one of the most numerous premiums. I think they sent over 3 million of them. Next. Here's a premium that from Captain Midnight that encouraged kids to use more Ovaltine. A lot of people have heard of shake-up mugs. Well, here's the 1947 Captain Midnight shake-up mug. And actually on some of the shows, the characters did make a shake-up, and it was part of the radio show. It's made of plastic. They didn't last long, they'd break. Next. This is the largest radio premium that was sent in the mail. It's 4 feet by 3.5 feet when it's completed. But it was so huge that they had to send this in 4 different mailers. So you had to send away for 4 different sections of this frontier town. And not only that, still wasn't enough. You go to the next picture. You still needed 9 more boxes of Cheerios to get more houses. So not only did you have to send away for the 4 sections of the map, you needed still 9 more boxes of Cheerios to finish this. Next. And this is what the frontier town would look like when it was built. I can't imagine, not too many mothers would want this thing, this huge premium laying around the house somewhere. And the kid might have had it up for a week before mom told him, get that thing out of here. Next. Baby Snooks had this dancing doll. You'd run a string through the head, and it had a body. Next. The body was made in such a way that it looked as though the legs were kind of hopping. Gildersleeve, oh, next. Gildersleeve had a record, Name My Song Contest. It's hard to find today. And I've had people tell me that it's the worst record they've ever heard. It was a 76 RPM record, so it's hard to play today. But it's a terrible song, but it's a wonderful premium. Next. This is a great premium that kids would order. It's a straight arrow. The collectors call it a cave ring. And the idea was you would send in your picture to Straight Arrow, and he would put it inside the ring. Next picture. And this is what it would look like when you looked inside the ring. Now, this was an older gentleman. Most of them are kids, but this is what would happen when you'd send in your picture. You would be in between Straight Arrow and his horse Fury. Can you imagine having your own picture with next to Straight Arrow? It must have been a real sensation. Kids must have really loved this premium. Next. I happen to have one in my collection where the kid didn't send in a picture. And what would happen is if you did not send a picture and you ordered the ring, they would give you the ring the way that with Packy, who's the Straight Arrow sidekick, would be in the center. And it's harder to find one like this because most kids followed instructions and sent in their picture. Next. I love these little premiums that you look inside and see things. But this is a precursor of what's coming. This is later in the 40s. And now they're starting to do things with televisions. This is an RCA Victor small plastic television set. You look inside it, next, and you see this little slide. There was over 30 different slides from not just Tom Mix, but there were magic tricks and other characters. I have another slide with Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. So you could interchange a lot of, the idea was you take it out and you replace it with another one. It's kind of a pain to do that. But I guess the kids had a lot of time back then. And this is what the slide looked like. Next. I think this is one of the best, most interesting premiums. It's a Ted Williams baseball ring. The idea was it's a spring-loaded base, and there's Ted Williams on top of the ring, and you'd pull back on the base, and then you'd release it, and Ted would swing, hitting this ball. It's such a fragile ring. I don't imagine if a kid wore this to a playground, it would last throughout the day. Not many of these are found today because it's so breakable. A lot of them, the springs would spring on the bottom, and there's so many things that could go wrong with this premium, but I happen to have one that's near mint condition. Next. The last Captain Midnight premium was this insignia, and it's printed backwards because you were supposed to iron this to a t-shirt. But it's almost the end of radio premiums because now this is 1949 and the Lone Ranger is already on television. Most of these radio shows are going to television. So as far as radio premiums are concerned, we're starting to see the end. Captain Midnight went to television and had a lot more premiums, and as well as a lot of these other shows like the Lone Ranger. There was more premiums on the way, but this talk is just about the radio premiums. So we're getting near the end of the radio premiums. Next. So we had another question. We wanted to know what the earliest radio premium was. No, the question was, what was the last radio premium? Dated. It has to be, again, it has to be dated. This particular one is from 1956. It's a Lone Ranger membership kit. So I haven't found one with a later date that mentions, now this one's important, on the bottom on the letter, it mentions tune in the Lone Ranger on radio and television. So it mentions the radio and it's dated 1956. So try to find, if someone's trying to beat this one to be later, it's got to say radio on it to be a radio premium. So the last picture I have is not really a radio premium next. I did it for all you people in the Washington Radio Club. This is the Secret Agent X9 membership card and badge from the Washington Times. So Washington, D.C. had a premium. Not many cities have them, but Detroit had it, Chicago, New York, but Washington also had this club. That would be, this would probably be delivered by newsboys. I would think that because it wasn't sent in the mail, there's no stamp on this. So I think that was picked at a mail. The paper boy would deliver this to the address written on it. That would be the end of the presentation, unless there's any questions that we might have from the peanut gallery.
Yeah, Larry, this is John Abbott. Couple of things. Yeah, in looking at these various premiums, there are so many of them today would be illegal, immoral, or just, put you in jail real quick.
Yes.
Also, the Washington Times, I don't believe that the Washington Times newspaper came about until like in the 70s, maybe. I know that Washington had the Washington Post and had the Times Herald and the Evening Star, but the Times, I think it was later than radio. So I don't know, maybe it was a different.
I've got other ones I have other ones from other shows that I'm sure are from the 30s. In fact, the shows I have, there's the Chicago Herald and Examiner, there's the Boston American, the Detroit Times, New York Journal, and the Wisconsin News. So that's that.
Yeah.
You can research if you'd like.
It looks like there were multiple Washington Timeses. One of them in the 30s.
It could be. That's what I expect it to be.
Yeah, in all likelihood, when you say Times Herald, one of them would have been the morning edition and the other would have been the afternoon edition. That's usually how it went.
Yeah, and they were all bought up by the Washington Post because at one point in time it was the Washington Post and Times Herald on the banner. So papers used to come and go quicker than the kids could deliver them.
If you go to that great source known as Wikipedia, they talk about for a newspaper with a similar name, see the Washington Times 1894 to 1939. Just an example.
I was slightly before my time. Oh, Larry, one other question. When were you in the Air Force?
1967 to 1970.
Yeah, and we kind of overlap there because I noticed in your picture you wearing Staff Sergeant stripes, and before I got into the Air Force in '66, you had to be 500 years old to be a Staff Sergeant, but at one point in time they were giving stripes away because I came out as a Staff Sergeant. So interesting times.
I made it in less than 3.5 years. I made it in about 3 years. But it was during the Vietnam time, and they were giving there was a lot of promotions then.
You have to walk down the street and you could become a major,
My friend who I was over there with, he was an enlisted man. He eventually, when he got out from the enlistment after 4 years and went back and went to officer school, and he actually stayed in the Air Force and retired as a lieutenant colonel. Any more questions?
Larry, I have one. Do you know if anybody that has a better collection than you?
Yes.
Really?
I might be in the top 10. But everybody has things that somebody else doesn't have. There's nobody who has everything. Now, as far as Captain Midnight, I'm pretty sure there's no one that can come close to what I've got. It's impossible. Because I have things that I got from the Ovaltine archives that no one else could possibly have. So, but there's a lot of great collectors out there.
I certainly enjoyed actually putting together the slides, and I had time to look at them, and I hope everybody will take another run through them when John posts it on our website, because if you go through them slowly, there's some really interesting things that you can see on them. And so thank you, Larry, very much for sharing your time and energy in putting it together. I know I appreciate it.
Maybe we'll see you at the Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia Convention this year.
I hope to see you again there. That would be fun.
The wonderful presentation. Oh, Sally Stevens has her hand up.
Sorry, I just had one question. I'm a preservationist by education, and I know you were talking about a lot of the items, are very fragile, very delicate, and, they're lucky to be, preserved to this point. What are your future plans for a lot of these items? Are you in contact with museums, or do you have, archives that you're going to be working with, or what kind of plans do you have for this collection?
I think there would be I think there'd be a line of people waiting to buy my premiums if I decided to sell them. I have a lot of Lone Ranger stuff. I have more Lone Ranger than anything else. I've actually helped Martin Graham's with a lot of photographs in his volumes he's doing of Lone Ranger books. And by the way, Martin and Stephen Thompson helped me on my Captain Midnight book. Without them, I couldn't have made the book. It was all on them. I provided the information. It was like taking a dirty car into a car wash and putting it in. And when it came out, it was all nice and clean. And that's what Martin and Stephen did with my book. They turned it into a polished book. So I'm forever grateful for them were helpful on the book.
Does anyone else have any questions or observations for Larry?
I have one question I'm rather curious about. Do you know why they were called premiums as opposed to something else?
No, that's what they started calling them. It had to have a name, so people called them premiums. And premiums just didn't have to be toys. Premiums could be. I just got a premium today in the mail from Fibber McGee and Molly, and it's for a polishing mitt. So that polishing mitt is actually a premium. Vic and Sade offered a couple pieces of silverware, like a spoon. A real popular premium is a spoon from Charlie McCarthy. Premiums could be a lot of things. And that's just what they started calling them. I guess they needed a name, and the name kind of stuck.
Well, you were certainly a font of information, Larry. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and, the wonderful photographs of premiums in your collection. It's really inspirational.
I have a lot more, but I wanted to keep it short. You're just seeing the scratching the surface of what I actually have.
So we'll call this part one, and when this could be an annual visit for the club.
Well, I have so much. Like I said, I could do almost a presentation on Lou Rogers. She's so fascinating. But yes, I have. You're just seeing. I just picked unusual early premiums today.
Well, that was wonderful. That gives us a taste, and that also, I'm sure, Frank will be hitting you up for more presentations. Thank you. Edgar.
Yes.
Hand up. Welcome, Edgar.
Thank you. Larry, I may have missed this, but is there a Holy Grail premium that you covet and are still trying to obtain?
Yes, there's a lot of them. I can tell you what every collector is looking for. Superman is like the Holy Grail of premiums. And they made several Superman rings from the comic books. And everybody wants one. But they're unrealistic. I have a list of premiums that I consider logical that I could possibly get, or ones that are impossible to get. And so I'm more realistic. I really have a nice collection of Frank Buck premiums. I could do a whole presentation on Frank Buck. He had stuffed animals, and he had a couple rings. And so as far as, well, the one thing I would really like to have that I don't have, I know there's one out there, is, remember on my Captain Midnight picture where it showed the kids by the car and there was a sign in the background? Well, I heard a few of those signs still exist. I would love to have one of those signs. They're about 7 feet tall. And I don't have one. That's one of the few Captain Midnight premiums I don't have. So I guess to answer your question, it's not beyond the realm of possibilities that I could get one of these. I'm not expecting to, but that would be the item that if I could wish for something, that's probably what I would wish for.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. You never know what will happen.
Yeah,
that's true. There's new discoveries all the time.
Right.
Larry, I have a question for you. With the the years that you've spent amassing all of this stuff, just a ballpark figure from the least expensive to the most expensive.
I'm a cheap collector. I would never, I have spent, I think the most I've ever spent on a premium was like $1,200. But majority of the stuff is on the cheaper side. If you're patient enough, not so much anymore, but if you're patient enough and you wait, you can finally, someone will eventually sell something at a price that you can afford. I always, I'm not, I know there's collectors out there, it seems like money is no object. But to me, money was an object. I never had a job that I made that much money where I could just spend infinite amount of dollars. So I always had to be careful of what I spent. But yeah, I'd say that I found some really great items for like $30, $20. But well, I got my Jack Benny picture for $5.
I know I collect sheet music and used to frequent antique malls and so forth. And I remember one that I was very much interested in. It was Barney Google. It was a comic book of Barney Google. And I saw it in an antique mall under lock and key. And I asked the people that were volunteers at the antique mall to contact the person who owned that. And if she would come down on price, and they did, and she said no. The following year, my wife and I went back to the same place, and it was still there. And again, I asked if the person would sell it for less than what they had on it, and they said no. And the third year, my wife and I went back to the same place, and again, a phone call to the owner who refused to lower the price. And I got home and I said to myself, in my life, I'm never, ever, ever going to find another comic book of Barney Google. It was in very good condition. So I called the mall and I said, tell the person I'll acquiesce and buy it at their price. And I finally have it. And that's the prize in my collection.
There you go.
Was it sheet music or a comic book?
It was a comic book.
Oh, you said you said you had a lot of sheet music. Well, I have there were premium sheet music. Well, I don't know if they actually were premium. Some of them were. There was an Orphan Annie one. There was a couple of Lone Rangers. I have sheet music from radio characters. Fibber McGee and Molly. Before they were Fibber McGee and Molly. There's a sheet music about that. So, yeah, I could do a whole program on sheet music.
I'll have to get together with you.
I have a wide ranging collection. I try to get something for everything. I'm also trying to get a script from every radio show. I've got a lot of scripts. I have one Vic and Sade script that is one of those shows that isn't available. And I love it because Vic and Sade is one of my favorite shows.
Larry, I have a question.
Yes.
This is Johnny Leonard. My question is, do you have the Captain Midnight photograph things
yes.
that they...
Yes.
How many do you have?
Well, I only really want one of each year, but they made a photograph in 41 and 42 metal ones. And then the two Warriors of 43 and 44, they really didn't make any, but they had paper ones. But then again, after the war, they could start making metal ones again. So in 45 until 49, they made the decoders. Then on television, they made them for 2 years, 56 and 57. They were plastic back then.
Also, do you have a walkie-talkie? I had one from Superman. I think it was made out of paper, and it didn't.
Yes, cardboard. I know of that one. I don't actually have one, but I know exactly which one you're talking about. It was made of cardboard, and you had to assemble it, and it was one. It was like those. It worked like those can with the string things. Where you take two cans and you run the string between them, and you talk that way. I'm familiar with it. but I really don't even want every premium. I'm not looking for the more common ones. I'm actually looking for the premiums that are harder to find. I figure that on a common premium, I can pick one up anytime on eBay. So I just don't really buy them because I could get one anytime I want one. I go for the ones that you might see once in your whole lifetime. And a lot of
And
the
I
ones that you
remember
saw,
there were several whistling rings. I think that the Lone Ranger had
there was all kinds
whistling
of rings.
rings. And right.
There's so many.
Well, thank you, Larry.
I could do a whole show on rings. It's just so many rings. So there's unusual rings. There's a bathtub ring, believe it or not. It's a little bathtub on top of a ring. There's a ring like that. I don't have it because it's pretty
that's
common.
right.
But if you want to talk about unusual rings, there's an unusual one.
Well, thank you, Larry.
Okay.
That is
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Any other questions for Larry before we release him back into the wild? I'm just impressed. You know, you said that you didn't, that you were a more economical in collector, but I knew someone who in college started collecting memorabilia not associated with radio. And, he would only buy things that were very inexpensive because he didn't have a lot of available extra cash at the time. And his collection grew to such a size that is now housed as a museum in Miami. And it's called the Wolfsonian. And it started with his just collecting these little things, that were just a few bucks a piece. But it was the strategic time to start collecting those items. So there may be the Zbetsonian or something someday with your collection.
I'm going to ask a question if it's okay. And it's a little bit similar to what Wendy is asking. Certain things from the past, because a generation is dying off, are getting less valuable. Other things, obviously, that are rare are becoming more valuable. What is your thought on the state of premium collecting at this point? Is it becoming easier to get or cheaper to get as time goes on, or is it getting more challenging or more expensive to get things?
It's a good question. The rare items continue to be strong. There's some rings, like the Superman rings, 20 years ago, before eBay came along, people would spend crazy amounts of money on them. Now prices have come down to more realistic. I think you could get one of the top Superman rings for probably, it all depends on condition too. I would say 5,000, or maybe back a long time ago, it could have been 70,000. I heard that Steven Spielberg was collecting premiums and he might have paid 100,000 for a ring once. Now prices are more realistic. I would say they're still strong for the rare premiums. That most collectors are very educated. They know what the rare ones are and they know what the common ones are. The common ones really are actually coming down in price, but the rare ones are either holding it or going up. And especially here's another thing really important. Collectors are looking for premiums that are complete. They're looking for ones with the envelope and the instruction sheet. I'll give you an example. One time at a Hake auction, they had a Captain America badge, membership card, and envelope, and they were all listed as a separate auction. You would think that the badge would have gone for the higher price, but it didn't. The badge went for the lower price. The most expensive part was the envelope, then the instructions was next, and then the ring, then the badge was last. So premiums with all the paperwork are going, even a common one will demand a better price. And with my collection, I've always focused in on premiums with the mailers and the instructions. Sometimes in the past, I've actually picked up the paperwork first and then gotten the more common premium later to complete the set. So to answer your question, yes and no, premiums are down and yet they're up.
Anybody else? Any other questions or curiosities?
If anybody wants to learn more about it, just join my group, Radio Premiums, if you want to learn more about it. It's just on Facebook. Anybody can join.
Well, it's a great
Did I hear
thing
another?
you're doing, because I like the fact that you're coming at it also with an artistic eye. So you're looking at things that are more unique and interesting from an just sheer art point of view. You know, all
You're
the
right.
membership cards and all of that, which were very, you know, the ones you showed us were really very interesting on that front. And also, I would imagine that the more delicate premiums, like your Charlie McCarthy, or not, your Edwin Mask from the World's Fair, would be something that would be more valuable because it's more fragile. And so it holding up over time would be trickier.
I wish these premiums could talk, because it would be amazing to hear how did they make it all the way from 1934 to now and not be ruined.
It's almost 100 years at this point. Yeah. It's quite remarkable. Well, I think as Larry said, if you want to know more, go to his Facebook page, Radio Premium's Facebook page, and I have a feeling you'll get a lot of answers to your questions. But you have certainly done a wonderful job with us. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. It's always a pleasure.
This is great. So now, Ms. Gray, we will move to the answers to the quiz. So you can close the poll out and then give us, you know, launch the answers at us.
Thank you so much. So here we go. Okay, so back to relatively speaking. Let's see how everyone did. Question 1, Mrs. Davis, Connie Brooks' landlady, had a sister who Mrs. Davis often said was absent-minded. What was the sister's name? The most popular answer was Alma. All of the options received votes. Angela and Arlene and Alice all received some votes. The answer, her sister's name, the absent-minded sister, was A, Angela. So congratulations to the 25% of you who knew Angela.
Kelly, can you, oh, there it is. There it is. See?
Was it not visible?
I was going to ask to see the quiz, and it just, you are so on top of my questions.
What can I say? What can I say? Okay, happy to do it. Yes, I'm glad you all can see it. On to question 2. Blanche Bickerson had a shiftless brother, Amos, but she also had her sister. What was her sister's name? And again, every option received some votes. Ethel, Clara, Eva, and Dinah. In this case, the plurality was correct. It was indeed B, which was Clara, which 44% of you guessed correctly. So good job.
Good there.
Question 3. On the Phil Harris and Alice Faye program, Alice had a brother named Willie who played Willie. And this one, no one thought it was Arnold East or Stephen South. And then the debate was whether it was Robert North or David West. And again, the majority had it correct. So it was indeed Robert North A. Very good. Number 4. On Vic and Sade, Sade had a relative referred to as Uncle Fletcher, played by Clarence Hartzell. What was Uncle Fletcher's name? Was it Gummer or Feeple or Rush or Dowd? All of the answers received some votes. And actually, the correct answer was the third most popular one. It was C, Rush, which I'm kind of surprised of, because that was the name of their son as well. But his name was Fletcher Rush. Moving on to number 5. Osgood Conklin had a teenage daughter named Harriet. His wife also appeared in many episodes. What was her first name? One person thought it was Melinda. A few thought it was Matilda. Nobody thought it was Magda. The majority was correct. She was Martha Conklin. So very good.
All right.
Okay. In a humorous episode of Gunsmoke entitled Marshal Proudfoot, Chester's father comes to Dodge with the impression from Chester's letters that he is the marshal. How many brothers does he say that Chester has? And you were kind of, I don't want to say all over the place, but you know, a few for 9, a few for 10, a few for 11, a few for 12. 10 was the most popular answer. The correct answer was 11. That in the episode, Mr. Proudfoot says he has 11 sons. So, sorry, the answer, oh no, the answer, the brothers would be 10, B, that Proudfoot says he has 11 sons. So if the question is how many brothers Chester has, it would be 10. So 10 brothers, 11 altogether. Question 7. On a date with Judy, Judy has a brother. What was his name? Everyone got some votes, but again, the majority had the correct answer. It was a Randolph. Number 8. Leroy and Marjorie were Gildersleeve's sisters' children. What was their surname? Nobody went for farmer. Nobody went for huntsman. A few went for gardener. The majority went for Forrester. And again, the majority got it right. They were Leroy and Marjorie Forrester. In a great episode of The Green Hornet, Britt's double identity as the Hornet is revealed to his father. What was his father's given name? Nobody thought it was Don. Nobody thought it was Sean. A few thought that it was John, and we have this trend where 67% of you got the right answer. It was indeed Dan. So I guess Dan Reed. Last but not least, going to the Marx Brothers. On Flywheel, Shyster, and Flywheel, for 26 weeks, Groucho Marx played a lawyer. Which of his brothers played his assistant? Nobody thought it was Gummo. A couple thought it might be Zeppo, a few more Harpo. The most popular answer, again, 2/3 of you believed it was Chico, and the 2/3 of you were correct. It was Chico, who I think actually was the oldest of the Marx brothers. So anyway, a very good job, all of you, with the relatively speaking quiz, and thank you, Frank, for the quiz.
And thank you, Kelly, for wading in. And I'm glad that Sally has a partner in crime now for the quizzes. We should be very well covered from now on.
A team. A team.
Yeah, a
team
of 3.
Yes.
There's more. You'll
Yeah.
just have to wait and find out.
Very good.
Quiz Queen will be.
Well, we look forward to this. So that's just terrific. And thank you very much. So that concludes the public part of our meeting that will be posted on YouTube by our own wonderful webmaster. So we will go into the business part